Ghost of Tsushima is a game that I've always had a bit of a strange relationship with over the last 5 years, ever since its release on this very day back in 2020, a year that I think we all remember very vividly, and somehow it feels like it was just 2 to 3 years ago, but also 15 years ago at the same time. Well, I played Ghost of Tsushima right as it came out back in 2020 and thoroughly enjoyed my playtime with the game. The reason I say I have a strange relationship with this game is because despite really liking it at the start, I randomly got bored with it, stopped playing, and never got around to finishing it despite always telling people how good this game was. It was one of those games that for whatever reason, I just could not stay hooked after around 10 or so hours of playtime despite really wanting to like it, despite really wanting to finish it and experience the story, and despite pretty much having nothing negative to say about it whatsoever. Now, I don't know if it was another game that stole my interest, the grind of 2020 that just burned me out on gaming, or simply just the fact that maybe I lost interest for no apparent reason, but it's always been one of those games that I've looked back on over the last few years with regret that I never gave it the time of day and got around to finishing it. Well, with that dreaded 5-year anniversary on its way, not only reminding me of how long it had been, but also how bloody old I am now, I decided to change that strange relationship with Ghost of Tsushima, and finally, 5 years later, play through the game from start to finish, and give it the time of day that it deserves. And so today I wanted to discuss the game in depth with you guys after revisiting it a whole 5 years later, breaking it down into 5 different parts, those being the combat and the overall gameplay, the map and the setting of Tsushima, and lastly the gripping story of Jin Sakai as well as the supporting cast, and the moral dilemma of deciding whether to fight with honor or do what it takes to save the people who need you most. Now, before the game even came out, before we'd even had a taste of the gameplay for ourselves, and all we'd seen was trailers from the team at Sucker Punch, it was pretty clear that the combat in this game was going to be something special, not only looking phenomenal from a cinematic standpoint, but clearly looking like a whole lot of fun for us as the player. Once the game finally arrived, it was clear that this wasn't just good marketing from Sucker Punch and Sony. The combat was just as good as we'd all hoped for, and if anything, it only got better and better as the game went on, not only through learning and just getting better on your own, but also due to some of the awesome upgrades, skills, and stances that can be unlocked as you make your way further into the story. From the very opening of this game, there is clearly an elephant in the room when it comes to Jin Sakai and the way that he operates as a samurai, because even though you're told early on to fight with honor and attack your enemy head on, less than an hour into the game, we're put in a position where it's impossible for Jin to do so if he wants to survive and continue helping the people of Tsushima with defending their land from the Mongol attack. This is where the overall premise of the story comes into play, a subplot to the main attack on Tsushima, almost a war of its own, burning away at Jin from the inside that only continues to get harder and harder as the story goes on. To me, this whole ghost versus samurai situation that we're faced with, which I will touch on more from a story perspective later on in the video, is one of the best links I've ever seen done in a video game between the subplot of a story and actual gameplay changing mechanics that truly do change the way you play this game, depending on the path that you choose to go down in your playthrough. While there are a few pivotal moments in the story where you simply must assassinate enemies, use poison or other methods that the samurai deem to be wrong, for the most part you really do have a choice in how you approach this whole ghost versus samurai dilemma. And not only does it somewhat affect the story, it does also drastically affect the gameplay. The best part about this choice is that both sides of the gameplay are done, for the most part, very well, to the point that it's not like either of these options is the clear favourite that most people decide on. And from my experience talking to friends who've played the game and just reading comments online, it really does seem pretty split down the middle in terms of how people approached this aspect of the gameplay. Now, for me personally, I really was a bit of a fence sitter in this recent playthrough, almost landing about 50-50 between wanting to fight with honor and taking enemies head on whenever possible, but also thoroughly enjoying the stealth gameplay and not wanting to completely miss out on that area of the game either. I'm an old school Assassin's Creed fan and I've always loved that stealthy assassin type of gameplay, and especially after playing Assassin's Creed Shadows earlier this year too, I was very keen to just compare the two games after that's seemingly all the internet was doing when Shadows launched, watched. And so not only did I just enjoy the stealth gameplay, it was almost a bit of an experiment for me too, to just compare the two games so closely to each other. While Ghost of Tsushima did do fairly well in my opinion when it came to the assassin-esque gameplay, having a really good skill curve where it felt like if you put the time into practicing and upgrading all of your skills, then it could play very smooth and check off pretty much everything you'd want from that type of gameplay. I do think, as much of a hot take as some people might think it is, that Shadows simply did this better, which realistically it should. That franchise is founded on stealthy assassin gameplay, where Ghost is not so much focused on that, at least not primarily anyway. On the flip side, while Assassin's Creed Shadows did actually surprise me with its decent and very satisfying head-to-head combat, especially having dual protagonists to change up the gameplay quite a bit, this is still an area where I think Ghost of Tsushima all but dominated its competition, because the samurai combat in this game, to me, is pretty much second to none, and as contradictory as it might sound, I think it can be improved on even further in its sequel, Ghost of Yotei, later this year. The head-to-head combat in Ghost of Tsushima is seriously some of the most cinematic and epic feeling combat that I've played in a long time, and granted, I played this playthrough on the PC version of the game, which is also the director's cut as opposed to just playing for the first time on the PS4, so obviously that helps with the graphics and the visual effects side of things, but it did feel just as enjoyable back then in 2020, and it's the area of this game that easily shines the most for me as the #1 selling point for anyone looking to play. While the combat at face value isn't really anything special, having your typical block and parry system, a light attack, heavy attack, and some unique combos, it is still very satisfying to play, at least in the early stages of the game. It feels rewarding to hit parries and counter your enemies, it's satisfying to chain dodges and attacks to make it feel like you're in the Matrix at times, but I will also say all of that alone isn't enough to put this combat in that elite tier of gameplay for me, and if that's all the game had to offer, I think there is a chance that I may have once again become bored with the game halfway through due to its somewhat repetitive nature. But for me, the area that does take it up a notch to that true elite tier of gameplay is the stance system. This system, although realistically pretty basic on paper, adds so much depth to the game through forcing your hand to make decisions on the fly on which stance you need to use against which opponent, and adds just that little extra bit of chaos where you're fighting off 3 enemy types at once and need to constantly be switching stances to manage them all at the same time. To me, this is the system that pretty much defined the combat in this game and set it apart from the rest. Again, not that it's groundbreaking or the first game to ever have different stances, but I just think this changed up the repetitive nature of the combat enough that it never really got boring, and combined with the awesome animations and the cinematic feeling of the combat, really added that last layer of polish that left us all loving this game's combat. Now, despite all that praise, the one area that I do have some critiques in was the bosses in this game, and that's being generous when I say bosses plural, because I'm not gonna lie, they were pretty much all identical to each other and left me feeling like they made just one boss fight and then essentially copy pasted it around the map. It's a strange situation for me as such a lover of awesome boss fights in any game that I play, where this game actually had far more enjoyable combat against regular enemies out in the world than any boss fight in the game. That is extremely rare for me. In fact, I couldn't tell you the last game that I played of this quality level anyway, where I actually preferred fighting regular soldiers over the boss fights. Every single one, at least the ones that I experienced anyways, it's not like I 100%ed the game or anything like that, but every single boss I fought was literally 1% different than the last one, excluding some of the mythic tales anyway, but just in terms of the main story bosses or even the majority of the optional bosses too, and to me, I did find this to be rather disappointing. The movesets between bosses were actually full-on identical, the only differences were their combinations and timing. For example, one boss would hit an unguardable red attack where he draws the katana from his sheath, and then after dodging that, he'd follow up with another unguardable attack. The next boss would then do the exact same attack, but instead of following up with a second one, he just wouldn't, and that was pretty much the extent of the changes between each boss fight. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand this isn't Elden Ring, where we're fighting a huge bloke with a dragon's head on his arm one moment, and then we're fighting a freaking wolf the next moment, both with entirely different movesets. At the end of the day, all of these bosses in this game are just samurai or ronin, and there's only so much you can do with a katana. So I do get it to a certain extent, and hell, maybe I've been spoiled with boss fights over the years from so many other games. But even just having different stances or a few differences in their movesets would have really made a massive difference in this game, and that's one area that I'm desperately hoping they improve on in Ghost of Yotei, as that could take that game to a whole other level. Even with Khotan Khan, the main boss of this game, when we finally got to him, yes, he did have a pretty different moveset than the rest, being the first one who didn't use a katana, but we then spent half the boss fight just fighting off his goons instead of 1v1ing the big fella. And so yeah, even that boss fight, despite enjoying it, I don't want to sound too negative here because all of these fights were fun, but it was still a bit of a missed opportunity in my opinion. Outside of the combat, one area of the game that became slightly better as time went on were the parkour mechanics, most notably just the ability to climb cliff faces and grapple onto trees or ledges. And while this did add a nice bit of variety to the game, and it also helped with the more stealthy ghost playstyle, I will say it was fairly basic and has definitely been done better in other franchises such as Assassin's Creed, although again, I don't think it needed to be phenomenal in this game either. It served its purpose well enough. It was for the most part pretty enjoyable, and it did allow you to get around to some cool areas of the map and some cool little hidden secrets that were scattered around the amazing world of Tsushima. There's something about the map and the overall setting of this game, the beautiful island of Tsushima, that is seriously special and is really unlike any other game that I've played in terms of its beauty and its aesthetic. This is, in my opinion, one of the most gorgeous looking maps that has probably ever been made, and not only does it look phenomenal, but it also plays well and perfectly suits the gameplay that this game has to offer. If the combat of Ghost of Tsushima is the heartbeat of this game, then the island of Tsushima itself is its soul. It's so hard to put a finger on what is just so special about this map though, because there are so many elements to it that are amazing, and I guess that shows that all of those things are what makes it special. It's not just the graphics or the beauty, it's not just the scale of the map or how much exploration it has to offer, it's not just the awesome setting for this story. It's all of those things done to an almost perfect level of quality that combine with each other seamlessly into what is truly one of the most beautiful, memorable, and enjoyable maps that I've ever experienced. And if the sequel, Ghost of Yotei, lives up to this even remotely, then we are no doubt in for another banger come October this year. Now, while I just said there is more to it than the graphics and the overall aesthetic of the map, that to me is probably the standout. It is genuinely beautiful to look at, regardless of whether it's a sunny day or whether there's a massive storm on the horizon. They somehow made it look absolutely gorgeous from a visual perspective, regardless of the weather or the time of day. And that's something that can't be said for most other games out there, in my opinion. Usually when the weather is dark and gloomy, the game reflects that and it never really looks quite as nice. But somehow in this game, it just looks picturesque at all times. Now, speaking of the weather, one thing I absolutely love that I only found out about recently is that the weather actually reflects your path within the game, and to me that is such an awesome touch that shows the passion and love they put into this game to have such minor, easily missable details like that scattered all throughout the game. When you've been playing with honor and using the typical samurai combat the game does so well, you'll notice that more often than not, the weather is nice and sunny, there are clear skies, and everything is just very nice to look at. On the flip side, if you've been doing a few missions where you're taking the stealthy approach and assassinating or even poisoning your enemies, then you'll start to notice that the weather is much more gloomy, it'll rain more, and it always just feels like the tone is just that little bit darker, and all of that is done by design. This was done so well that I didn't even notice it until about halfway through the game, where I then also saw something on Reddit about this mechanic, and so the fact that it is so easily missable, to me that's just an awesome feature that didn't need to be done, and I don't think anyone would even notice if they removed that feature, but because it is there, it's just another one of those mechanics that really does add to the overall quality of this game, and probably circles back to what I said earlier, where often you can't really put a finger on why this map and this game in general is so special. Those little things do add up, even though they can often go unnoticed. One other area that relates to the weather is the awesome addition of the wind mechanic in this game, something that was far more noticeable and honestly became a bit of a game-defining mechanic, just another thing that sets this game apart from so many others like it. Rather than the typical inclusion of a minimap or a compass that shows you where you need to be going, Sucker Punch used the wind to show us as the player where we needed to be going and which direction was the right way for our objective. And not only was it just an awesome mechanic that changed things up, but it even adds to the beauty that I was talking about before. Some of the more picturesque moments in this game take place when you're simply riding along on your horse through an open field, the wind blowing behind your back and causing the plants and the flowers to dance along to the wind. That to me is probably the next thing I think of when I think about Ghost of Tsushima behind its combat as some of the more memorable and cherished moments in the entire game. To me, it also felt like it made me pay far more attention to the actual world I was running around in rather than simply staring at the UI to see where I needed to go, almost forcing you to stop and smell the flowers in a lot of ways because you actually have to pay attention to your immediate surroundings. Unlike many other games out there where half the time you're taken out of the immersion when you need to open up another menu or constantly look at a map to see where you're headed. Half the time I'd be tracking the wind to see where I'm headed and it would cause me to see something nearby that looked interesting, unlocking that exploration side of my brain, whereas in other games, oftentimes I can just completely miss a lot of the side content or the points of interest because instead of paying attention to the world around me, I'm looking at the map or I straight up just have an objective marker in the middle of my screen, which in turn gives me tunnel vision on that objective and causes me to miss some of the more interesting areas of the map. That to me is why the system was so special and so underrated, because it is more than just a unique quest marker that does things slightly different. It's a mechanic that helps you stay fully immersed as much as humanly possible. And to me, it greatly increased my overall enjoyment more than I probably even realize. Throughout your journey on Tsushima, there is also plenty of awesome stuff to come across that can be considered side content, from little mini games that give you bonuses or skill upgrades to the fox dens that not only unlock charm slots, but most importantly, let you pet these little cuties around the island once you're done honoring the shrine. And overall, there is just plenty of different stuff the game has to offer. The most important part to me though was that it all felt like it made sense within that world and that it wasn't just there for the sake of something to do. It all links together with the setting, it all has a backstory and helps progress Jin as a character, and a lot of it helps the world feel lived in, which is also such a huge thing for me when it comes to the immersion. The balance this game offers between its main path and its castles, fortresses and epic battles, and these slower, more intimate moments with Jin or other characters throughout the world, it really did allow you to play the game at your own pace and not always have to be in the midst of an action sequence, as fun as those sequences were. The slow moments remind us that despite the action and the combat, this is also a story about Jin, a man searching for balance, torn between his two different identities of being a noble samurai, but also his new persona as the Ghost. These slow moments often help us see that he's still figuring everything out at his own pace, and it perfectly blends the island and the overall setting with the story that this game was trying to tell. The story of Ghost of Tsushima is a story with so many different layers and so many different angles to look at it from, and having already spoken about the combat and the setting, the story really is the glue that binds all of these things together into the game that we all know and love. It's not only a story of war, of people losing their homes and their loved ones and fighting back against their enemies, but it's also a story of confliction within Jin himself and even within the family that he comes from, having a much more personal story bubbling away underneath the main story, that being the invasion of Tsushima. Right from the very beginning of this story, the stakes are set when we see the Mongol invasion of Tsushima begin, and within a matter of minutes, almost the entire army of the samurai are taken out, with essentially all of them dying, aside from Lord Shimura and his nephew Jin. And this sets it up very early on that this is going to be a dark and grueling story. After taking the fight to Khotan Khan on the bridge leading to Castle Canada, Jin takes yet another loss and is thrown over the edge, barely managing to survive before he washes up on the beach. And this is where we're introduced to Yuna, Jin's trusty sidekick throughout the story, who is easily the most influential character in his life, outside of Lord Shimura himself, and even then she's arguably more influential with the journey they go on together. All his life, Jin had been taught to fight with honor, to fight as a samurai and fight enemies head on in order to give them an honorable death. That is essentially the code of the samurai, and there is no one who preaches that code more than Lord Shimura. But Yuna, she wasn't trained as a samurai, rather she's just a cunning warrior with her own code, and early on she shows Jin, and even urges him, to adopt a few stealthy tactics in order to fight the Mongols. At this point, seemingly most of their allies are dead, and Yuna knows that they can't take on the Mongol Empire head on. Their only chance of survival is to fight in the shadows and do things on their terms. We see early on that Jin is very much against this, feeling conflicted about Yuna's tactics and telling her that as a samurai, that's against everything he's ever known, but it's clear that deep down, he also agrees with her on the fact that there's just no way they'll be able to impact this war in the way that they want to, if he's to go in honorably and fight the Mongols head on. Not only that, but throughout his journey, he sees more and more that the Mongols themselves don't fight with honor either. They're ruthless, devoid of any sort of code, and they're willing to do anything and everything to ensure their invasion is a success. Most of that stemming from Khotan Khan himself, as he is clearly not the most honorable man himself. While Jin continues to try and fight against Yuna's strategies and do things the right way in regards to the samurai code, it becomes more and more apparent that he is willing to change his ways if it means he can save his uncle and save his beloved home. Jin and Yuna begin planning their rebellion against the Mongols, and their first order of business is recruiting allies to help fight with them and set things right on Tsushima, with those most notably being Sensei Ishikawa, a master archer who's a deadeye with his trusty bow, Lady Masako, a noblewoman whose entire clan had been murdered by the Mongols, as well as freeing Taka, Yuna's younger brother, one of the most skilled blacksmiths in the land. Throughout this section of the game, there are multiple moments where even if you decide to play purely with honor, you are forced to do some dishonorable things by the samurai code, and word begins to spread around the island in a good way and in a bad way. The negative side to this is that Khotan Khan mentions to Lord Shimura, who he's still holding captive in Castle Canada, that Jin has been using stealth and fear tactics to win battles against Khotan Khan's army, and Lord Shimura becomes disgruntled by this. To him, honor means everything, and he feels disappointed in Jin that he's not doing things the way that he was taught. On the flip side though, in a more positive side to these tactics, word spreads around the island about the so-called Ghost of Tsushima, an unknown warrior who's taking the fight back to the Mongols, and the people of Tsushima begin to believe that they can in fact push the Mongols back off the island and reclaim their home. This was never the intention of Jin, and these believers in the Ghost don't even know Jin Sakurai, the samurai, is the so-called ghost, because most people assume he died along with the rest of the samurai. But it becomes pretty clear that this word of mouth is working in his favor, and slowly, despite the initial conflict of breaking his code, he begins to buy into his new persona as the Ghost of Tsushima. While the locals begin to believe, the Mongols begin to fear the ghost, knowing that he could attack at any moment, unsettling the army and angering at Khotan Khan, and it appears that Jin alone acting as the ghost has greatly swayed the battle back to a much more even standing. The odds are still greatly in the favor of the Mongols due to sheer numbers and brutality, but Tsushima has gone from complete and utter hopelessness to truly believing they can defend the island they call home. After rescuing Lord Shimura from Castle Canada with more of these dishonorable tactics, there's a clear rift between Jin and his uncle, as Lord Shimura is so deeply blinded by his honor, while Jin is far more concerned with saving the island and its people than worrying about whether he's doing things the right way. Jin will save Tsushima at any cost, while it's clear that's not the case for Lord Shimura, as he's only willing to save his people if it comes with the honor the samurai and the shogun hold so dearly. As the story progresses and things start to heat up towards a climactic battle between the samurai reinforcements and the Mongols, we run into an almighty twist in this story. Ryuzo, who is Jin's childhood friend that he's been working with alongside his Straw Hat Ronin, betrays Jin when he needed him most, as he allies himself and his Ronin with the Khan in order to receive much needed food and supplies for his men. Clearly this breaks both Jin and Ryuzo, and it leads to our first battle against him in a very picturesque setting, a battle where Jin is successful in beating him. However, he calls for reinforcements and runs away at the end of the fight, rather than accepting his loss, and it shows he is clearly no longer the person that Jin knew back when they were children. When it's finally time to assault Castle Shimura and push the Mongols to the north, rather than taking Lord Shimura's advice and fighting alongside the samurai, Jin enters the castle alone as the ghost, eventually doing what needs to be done in spite of Lord Shimura's wishes, and this results in yet another fight with Ryuzo, this one not ending quite as well for him, as Jin does finally decide to kill him and put an end to the pain that he's caused not only Jin, but the rest of their allies. Despite winning the battle, Lord Shimura gives Jin an ultimatum. Join him in their initial plan of Shimura adopting him as a son, seeing as he raised him his entire life, and come back to the ways of the samurai. Or if he disobeys, then the orders from the shogun are that he is to be declared a traitor and must be detained as a prisoner. Jin refuses to accept the law of the samurai once again, and so he is detained, destined to spend his time in a cell, but eventually he has help from his ally Kenji in escaping, as Jin's allies know how important the ghost is for Tsushima with the war still ongoing. This leads us to, by far, the saddest part of this story to me, the moment of Jin's escape. At the beginning of the game, you choose your horse from a few potential options, and the horse sticks with you throughout your entire journey, showing just as much loyalty as anyone else in the story. Now, the horse that I chose in my playthrough was called Kage, which means shadow, as I felt that was perfectly suited to the persona of the ghost, and it's fair to say, I really liked my horse throughout this playthrough. But in Jin's escape from Lord Shimura's prison cell, Kage was shot by archers, still managing to ride Jin to safety despite the injuries, but it becomes apparent very quickly that Kage was not doing very well, and unfortunately, after a long journey to the middle of nowhere in order to escape from prison, Kage doesn't make it. This genuinely ruined me in this moment. I remember just pausing the game for a good couple of minutes and just staring out the window, which I know is crazy to say over a make-believe horse in a video game. I know, but it was genuinely the most depressing part of this game for me, and clearly fueled Jin even further against his uncle in the fact that they killed his trusty companion. From here, the final act of the game shows Jin off on his own, leaving Shimura in the past and working with his allies to rid Tsushima of the Mongol presence, and it leads us to the Battle of Fort Izumi, where the Khan and his army have been holed up. Now, this sequence was one of the most exhilarating in the entire game, as at this point in the story, Jin is fully equipped with everything he needs, from all of his stances, a multitude of different skills and gadgets, and it all comes together in what is an epic battle for the fate of Tsushima during a wintry storm that has taken over the island. After pushing their way through the fort, Jin finally makes it to Khotan Khan, and here we see one of the better boss fights the game has to offer in the culmination of all that has unfolded over these last few weeks. The snowy setting, the buildings burning in the background, and the future of the island hanging in the balance, it really did set the stakes for this battle and added even further to the immersion. After a grueling battle where you fight not only Khotan Khan, but what feels like about 30 of his Mongol warriors all charging at you from different angles, Jin finally gets the better of the Khan and puts an end to his reign on Tsushima, after what I was actually shocked to find out was only 14 days from the beginning of this game to this moment at the end. It feels like you've won, it feels like all is right in the world and the story can have a happy ending, but unfortunately that is not really the case. Now, like I said at the start, I played this game probably around halfway through back in 2020, but this playthrough was the first time I actually beat the game, and so I have genuinely no idea how this was never spoiled for me over the course of the last 5 years. After Jin saves the island from the Mongols, Lord Shimura has to do the unthinkable. He receives an order from the Shogun that Clan Sakai have been banished from the Samurai Order, and that Jin is again declared a traitor, this time requiring Lord Shimura himself to end his life. There's such a powerful moment here where Shimura says to his nephew, "You have no honor," and Jin replies, "And you are a slave to it." And to me, this essentially sums up the entire conflict between these two characters. Lord Shimura genuinely was a slave to his honor, willing to risk the entire island just to keep that honor rather than doing what needed to be done in order to save his people, even if that meant going against his code. No matter what Jin says in this scene, it's clear Shimura's mind will not be changed, and so it comes down to the final battle between a nephew and his uncle, two people that clearly love each other dearly, but hold their own values so close to their heart that they must sacrifice their relationship in order to stay true to themselves. This duel is a cinematic masterpiece in my opinion, and while, like I mentioned earlier on, the combat itself is pretty much identical to the other duels throughout the game, the stakes and the emotion in this battle were as high as they had ever been. There was to be no winner of this fight regardless of what happened, because neither of them wanted this to happen. After winning the fight, you are presented with a choice: grant Shimura his wish for an honorable death, or spare him and walk away. While it was fairly difficult, I had brought into the whole ghost persona myself in my playthrough, and I'm also not gonna lie, I just couldn't stand this dude for about 95% of the game, and so I decided to grant him his wish, killing him with honor before the credits begin to roll, after this emotional roller coaster of a final sequence. Whichever path you choose here, the ending is somber, and there really isn't a happy ending to this game. Tsushima is saved, but the cost is personal to Jin, either physically losing his uncle or losing him emotionally, even if you spare him. And even 5 years later, I still think so many people remember this story and its powerful themes, amazing setting, and phenomenal combat. So to summarize my thoughts, I guess it's obvious to say that I'm very happy in my decision to finally play this game once again, this time finishing it and experiencing pretty much everything the game has to offer, because it has quickly become one of my most loved games over the last 5 to 10 years, which isn't an easy feat with how many awesome games we've received over the years. With the sequel coming up later this year too, it felt like the perfect time to replay it, and honestly, whether you have or haven't played Ghost of Tsushima, there really is no better time to play it than now, in order to be refreshed on the story and the gameplay heading into what I have no doubt will be an absolutely phenomenal sequel. One that you can expect me to cover, whether that is here on this channel or in the form of guides and informative videos over on one of my other channels, Sammy Boy Gaming. For those of you still watching all the way through to the end, I just wanted to say a massive thank you for the support. Hopefully you've enjoyed this one, and if you did, please do consider hitting that subscribe button, as there are plenty more long form videos on the way just like this one, with the next few games I'm planning on covering being Hades and Cyberpunk 2077. I'm also keen to hear all of your thoughts on Ghost of Tsushima down in the comments section, as I genuinely do enjoy reading all of your comments and discussing these awesome games with you guys. So be sure to let me know what you think of the game, whether you enjoyed it for the story or for the combat, and whether or not you're excited for Ghost of Yotei in October of this year. But with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.